So with that, I would like to welcome everyone. I hope that all of you are keeping well enough and raging against whatever injustices wherever you're encountering them. And thank you so much for joining us for this virtual roundtable event on Arabic script OCR and HTR. This is the second session of our Middle East Librarians Association 2020 annual meeting. Excuse me. And our deepest thanks go to Robin Doherty and our program committee for their tireless efforts with this year's virtual meeting and for this opportunity to be in community. My name is Evan Kropp. I'm a librarian and curator at the University of Michigan and current chair of the steering committee of the Middle East Librarians Association Digital Scholarship Interest Group, or the MELA DSIG as we're known. The interest group was formed in 2018 to better support our community of collection worker colleagues as we engage with digital humanities, digital scholarship. Our aim is to foster a community of practice around partnering on and initiating digital scholarship projects, and to together better explore and enact the role that we as specialists working in Southwest Asian, North African librarianship play in digital scholarship work. All interested colleagues are welcome to join our interest group by way of our MELA DSIG discussion list that is accessible via the MELA site. And our steering committee will be inviting new members later this fall. Today's roundtable discussion is organized by the current MELA DSIG steering committee, and I would like to acknowledge and thank my fellow steering committee colleagues for their contributions toward realizing this event. In particular, Dale J. Correa, who is co-moderating with me. Please, could you say hello again, Dale?
Greetings, everyone.
Dale is generously serving as our roundtable discussant as well. So, Zoom meetings may feel insufferably familiar at this stage, but in light of our virtual communion for this session, I would just like to quickly highlight a few features before we go any further. So first, I'm going to be sure that live transcripts are enabled. These closed captions will be provided during the meeting. If you would like to view the full transcript or hide the closed captions or subtitles as they appear, you will have the ability to do that by accessing the live transcript icon. When not speaking, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted. And of course, it is at your discretion if you wish to enable or disable your video. Audio is muted upon entry, so if you are wishing to speak, just be sure that you check to unmute yourself. We'll ask that you please use the raise hand feature when you wish to offer a spoken question or comment during the Q&A. You'll be invited to unmute. Chat is also enabled, and we welcome you to enter your comments or questions to the chat. We also ask that you note that the meeting is being recorded. It will be possible for us to edit the recording after the session, so if you have any concerns, please feel free to pass those along to me. Okay. So today's roundtable invites a conversation around Arabic script automated text recognition. We are all very well familiar with the complexity of the Arabic script and the complicated morphology and orthography of its associated languages. These have presented tremendous challenges for traditional OCR approaches, but lately we have seen exciting developments venturing into new computational techniques, such as neural networks and so forth. These developments with automated transcription of Arabic script are taking place rapidly and with increasing momentum, as a number of large-scale, collaborative, even cutting-edge projects target reasonable OCR and HTR solutions for printed and handwritten texts. And a number of you are active participants in these projects. We could mention Arabic Collections Online, the Qatar Digital Library, and the partnership of the British Library and Qatar Foundation. Of course, the Open ITI AOCP project, and then of course the HTR Digital Library, which has been relying on for Google digitized books, the OCR provided by Google, which as far as we understand is derived from probably some combination of Tesseract and Acropus. I'm sure there may be others who can comment more on this, but in recent weeks with the emergency access, it has been clear that the quality of this OCR is actually fairly decent. And so, yes, it is quite interesting to see what is now even already accessible to us through HTR, albeit under these emergency provisions. Our partners and colleagues in the Open ITI AOCP project convened quite a group of colleagues active in this area during their workshop in January this year. OCR and digital text production, learning from the past, fostering collaboration, coordination for the future. There was much discussion on Twitter around the activity of this workshop, and I believe there is intention for a publication. So I encourage you to be following that. We'll hear more from our colleague Matthew Thomas Miller later on. As collection workers and information specialists, documenting, preserving, and enabling access to text-based materials in Arabic script, our community is naturally already deeply invested and engaged in various ways with this work. In addition to our partnership on these large-scale digitization and research projects, we consult and advise on more modest-scale projects of individual researchers who are working with a variety of materials and languages, as well as, of course, our own projects. Today's roundtable aims to better acquaint our colleagues with some recent developments by showcasing the experiences of a sampling of colleagues working with various Arabic script OCR and HTR tools, workflows, materials, formats, and languages. Our scope cannot possibly be comprehensive, and so today we are actually focusing mainly on approaches that target printed texts and primarily a significant number of printed texts. So we will hear from colleagues working with OCR, Arabic newspapers, with an adapted form of Tesseract, OCR for Persian monographs and others with Novoveres, HTR for Ottoman Turkish printed periodicals with Transcribus, and then of course we will have a report from the Open ITI AOCP project. Through this conversation, we hope to offer reflections on progress with Arabic script, OCR, HTR performance reliability, costs, and other factors, as well as to invite our community to consider the implications of this advancing technology for collecting, preserving, and pursuing research, as well as our ongoing contributions to this work as collection workers, library and archive specialists. So with that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Dale J. Correa of the University of Texas at Austin, who will be the discussant for our roundtable and moderating our opening discussion. So Dale, I will stop sharing my screen and hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Evan. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to join you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We've got folks from all over the world joining us today, which is really a beautiful thing with Zoom in light of the circumstances. And I am eager to hear from all of our panelists and discuss some crucial issues regarding Arabic script OCR and HTR. Our speakers today are Akram Khater from the Khairullah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies at North Carolina State University, Peter Magirski from Columbia University Library, and Suphan Kermazultan, who is currently with NYU Abu Dhabi's History Department. I'd like to share my screen with you so that I can show you the questions that I have given, that we actually, Evan, designed these. We've given to our presenters today to consider. And so these questions include discussing their projects in terms of what have been the aims for their work with Arabic OCR and HTR. What tools have they worked with? How did they select those tools? What materials did they work on? How did they gain access to those materials? And how were they prepared for OCR or HTR? What workflows did you adopt to generate your OCR data? What support did you have for your work? What results did you achieve? And then a few questions here reflecting on the outcome of their work. What was particularly satisfying about these projects? How might have you approached things differently? And one more question that I want to throw in there for us to consider in the larger discussion is what structures or resources could be useful for not reinventing the wheel for each project? I suspect that we're going to be hearing a bit about initial stumbling blocks and especially in the selection of tools, why certain tools were chosen over others and what has worked and what hasn't. And it seems we're getting to a point with Arabic OCR, Arabic script OCR and HTR that we need to be able to share and also access information about tools that are useful in different ways so that we don't have to redo all of this work every single time with our projects. And so with that, each panelist will have a maximum of 15 minutes to speak. Over Zoom, it can be a little bit awkward to try and intervene and let you know about your time. So I will do my best to either communicate that via chat or through my little window on Zoom. If I have to interrupt, I apologize, but I may have to do that just to keep us to time. But I promise everyone will get at least 15 minutes to speak. So with that, let's begin with Akram Khater and his project with the Khairullah Center.
Thank you, Dale. And I put my timer so I have 15 minutes so that it'll tell me to shut up after that. Thank you very much for MELA and for DSIG for organizing this. And right from the outset, I would like to acknowledge the pioneering work of so many people that came before that made this project that I'm going to talk about today possible. In particular, Matthew, Sarah, and Maxime. Matthew is here joining us, of course, today, and I'm really anxious to look forward to him. And in fact, the project that I'm going to talk about today, as I said, owes a lot to them. So I would like to acknowledge that. So again, as Dale said, and as Evan said, I direct a center for research called the Khairullah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies. We take the term Lebanese very loosely here. It's really more about the Middle East in general, but it's really about Arab Americans and immigration from the Middle East in general to the United States. As a part of that project, we have been building a fairly large archive. As you can imagine, this includes anything from photographs, vinyl, letters, and so on and so forth. But amongst the collection that we have is something. Right now we have about, actually a little bit more than 250,000. We have over 300,000 pages of Arab American newspapers published between 1899 and 1950, primarily from North America, although right now we're extending our collaborative work to the National Library of Argentina and the Brazilian National Archives in order to get access to the Arabic publications there. And we estimate that within about 5 years, we're going to have about 1 million pages of specifically just this particular project. Obviously, we have other stuff. And I don't need to tell you this because you can already see the scan quality, the image quality is going to be different. I hope you can see anyway. And you also know very well that the biggest problem we have is you can digitize an image fine, but you can't search it. And that's what we are talking about here today, is how do you make this easy to access for researchers? And this is, I have to admit, this is a very selfish thing. My first book, I sat at the New York Public Library going through microfilm one by one, and my patience for doing that wore off very quickly. And I think from that point on, in a previous life, I was a computer engineer. So from that point on, I kept thinking about how do we make this humanities better. And thankfully, I encountered the work of, as I said, Matthew, Maxime, and Sarah, who in many ways introduced me to this idea of neural networks and deep learning software. So immediately we started looking around. Obviously, commercial stuff for pre-computer generated Arabic script doesn't really produce a whole lot of OCR. We experimented with commercial stuff, and we really weren't satisfied. So we had some goals. We had modest goals. We wanted to at least achieve 50% accuracy using open source software. That's one. We wanted to then generate searchable PDFs, the researchers, and for the images in the data set, so they can be searched within a major database that we've developed, and then create some sort of search functionality to allow researchers to do all of this. We played around with, I think these names will be very familiar, as Tesseract, and we had some, the work, what we approach it with is the idea of providing this open source software with some sort of data, what we call truth data. Other people will use this term, which is stuff that we transcribe manually, about 250 paragraphs from 50 documents, 75 documents, that the computer knows that's exactly what the Arabic is saying. And then we ran it through, and generally speaking, this is about the accuracy we attained, about 30 to 50% accuracy. We had a lot of issues with the output, especially when you have mixed languages. We decided to improve the accuracy, and what we did is we started playing around with the images themselves. We used a newer form of Tesseract that has a little bit more finely tuned, but really we started adding pre-processing scripts to our software to deskew, binarize, clean, so on and so forth. And we provided a little bit more training for Tesseract. And this is basically the sample results that we got from various things. As you can see, the accuracy goes down dramatically as you get into more and more, images that are really not, optimal images. But nonetheless, if you look at the left, well, my left anyway, with the clearest image, let's say, the accuracy rates were about, 86 in the mid 80th percentile. Again, we were very excited. Remember, we're aiming for 50% to make it usable. Now we're getting up into upper 80s. That's all sounding good. But then we wanted to train custom. Tesseract, you can't really train too much. So we went to Kraken, and that's something that Matthew and Maxine and Sarah know a lot about. And the issue that with training these things is you have to provide, the more data you provide, the better the results are. Again, nothing I'm saying here is new. You know all of this. So basically, the more you tell these this open source software that this is the truth, and they run through it, and then you correct it over and over again, the better. The question is, we just really weren't getting a whole lot of results with the newspapers. So we wanted to train them, and we didn't want to sit there and type. So what we did is we went to facial recognition software. And this is one of the advantages of being in a university, because really this stuff doesn't care whether it's Arabic, whether it is Korean, or whether it's a face. It's recognizing a shape and trying to make sense of what it is and then correlating it with a letter. So we, a colleague of mine here who is a professor of statistics, had a PhD student who now has an excellent job with Apple, who was working on facial recognition software. And the idea is that we took some 70 lines of Arabic, and then we generated 100,000 points of data based on that in a randomized fashion. And as you can see, we created all sorts of different backgrounds. We skewed it. We made it, focused, unfocused. Basically, within 30 minutes, we took 70 points of data, turned it into 100,000 points of data. And that really is one of the elements that I think becomes very important in terms of training, because we use calamari at this point, OCR. I don't know what's with the fish motif with these things, but anyway, we ended up basically, it took us, as I said, 30 minutes to produce that 100,000 line of synthetic text, but we always knew what the truth is because we entered it based on these 70 things. But then we generate 100,000, skewed, lots of noise, lots of dust, what have you, all simulated. And then the computer was learning, oh, okay, this is a wow, this is a wow, this is a wow, regardless of where it is. And we achieved 95% accuracy. Very exciting. We're very thrilled by that. There were some restrictions as I'll go. And here's some, again, I can share some of the stuff with you, by the way, so you don't really need. But as you can see, we were getting some really good score, far above what Tesseract was giving us. So calamari, in essence, was our go-to at this point. Now, the problem that we face with newspapers, unlike books, is that the segmentation is a little bit more complicated. And this is something I discussed with Matthew as part of it. And so we tried as best as we can, but in-house, and here I'm talking about computer science, students and a couple colleagues in the computer science department, we really weren't attaining the segmentation of the page to run the OCR effectively. And what we discovered is Google Vision does segmentation far more effectively than anything we could do. So in essence, we created a system that looks like this. Sorry, I'm gonna. So basically what we do is we have a workflow that takes an image, we run some software, some script to clean it up, deskew it, create better contrast, so on and so forth, create a thumbnail of it, because we always will use a thumbnail, as I'll show you, segment it using Google Vision, run it through calamari to perform OCR, retrieve the JSON file, which is a text file, and remap it onto a PDF. And then from there, we send it on to AWS. So all of our database right now is sitting on AWS, and it enters a database and it becomes subject to query. So again, I'll share all this stuff with you. I know there's a lot of, and then, so we basically have created, so the OCR part is one. We have one set of scripts to clean the images, one set of script to segment them, one set of script to basically run OCR, then another one to recombine into a searchable PDF, and finally load it up to our database. And we used open semantic search to create a very simple search functionality. I mean, we're still at this point working with it, and it uses Solar backend and we created a simple search interface for public use. And again, this is just all stuff that we did with AWS that we use for the stuff that we want to call fast. We put it in one, server. For the other, we put it in a little slower server. But basically, all of our stuff right now is on AWS. And in essence, this is kind of what we do with this pre-processing PCR, generate the PDF, run Solar on it so that it fills the database, and then put it in this. And I'm just going to quickly show you. Is that okay? Can I show the? So when you go to our website, and I'm happy to share this, this is still not really public beta at this point. We're still keeping this as a private beta. I'll sign in. I've signed in before. It looks something like this right now. And I can say something. I'm going to shift to Arabic, I think.
Akram, I will say we're only seeing the demonstration link.
Okay, sorry, hold on. All right,
let me stop share and then reshare from that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Of course.
Okay, let me go back to where I was. So here's here's where well, before that I entered in, a password. Again, you have to register to use it. It's free. This will always be free. And we're happy, by the way, to share the technology and our experiences. And then if you want to enter something like Lebanon, not that I'm biased or anything, it's going to pull up the pages where it finds this, right? You can, at this point, we have two refinement. One is what collection you have, so what newspaper you do, and then dates. And we're working on improving the search functionality. But basically, you click on view, sometime this century maybe. And this is one of the things that I've noticed sometimes. It kind of decides that it's going to not work. Sorry. I promise it does actually pull up something that's searchable, but for some reason it's deciding that. There we go. So this is, as you can see here, it's all text. So if I'm going to look for the same word, Lebanon, it's going to find it. Now, you will see, it's hard to see, I imagine. So you can see where it's finding the terms. What we're also finding is one of the difficulties that we are facing right now is the exact mapping back here. So as you can see, for example, here, it's highlighted Nihaiyan instead of Lebanon, which is right above it. So sometimes there's a shift here, as you can see, it's highlighting way too much when in fact it's supposed to do that. So that's one of the problems that we're still trying to refine, is how to divide the page into exact matrix with coordinates to make it functional. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, that, well, it's not a problem, but we're working on it and we're hoping that it'll be solved soon, is what we would like to do, especially for researchers, is that when we pull up an image of one page, especially in newspapers, we want to have a ribbon at the bottom that provides all the pages from that issue, because articles, as you know, flip from one page to the next. So if a researcher is working, they can see the whole bottom. So our refinement right now is happening with speed. Although, the retrieving is fairly fast, sometimes display is a little slower, as you saw. Accuracy of mapping on the page once you have the searchable PDF. And the third thing that we're doing, which is creating a better search functionalities every day. So this is, I know I've kind of been rushing through this, but I wanted to do it within the 15 minutes and I have 1 minute left. So our aim then is that once we have a couple of things sorted out, is to basically open this up as a public beta. And it will always be a growing project. We are always learning. And what I find to be very important, and answer some of the questions, I know I didn't answer all of Dale's questions, but one of the important aspects of things is collaboration. This could not have been done without collaboration. We have collaborated with computer science, statistics. We have collaborated with linguists, obviously. We have collaborated with the College of Design. So collaboration is absolutely essential, and learning from colleagues who pioneered and are making great strides in this. And we're always thinking of ways. We're still working on the segmentations, for example, so that we will move away from Google Vision for segmentation and use our in-house segmentation. And that's a project that's ongoing at this point. I will leave it at that, and I have 7 seconds left, so I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akram. That was wonderful. For clapping, we can use the clap reaction. Just so you all know, that can be kind of fun. But our final panelist is Stupan Kırmızıaltın. And after her presentation, we will have, I will give a brief discussion, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A and discussion. Stupan?
Thank you, Dale. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my presentation? Okay,
yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to start by saying that it is a real pleasure to be participating in this roundtable today. I have already learned so much by just sitting here and listening to the first two talks, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion session. Today I am going to be talking about my collaborative work with David Risley for the automated text recognition and transcription of Ottoman Turkish with HTR using the Transcribus platform. David and I have been working with Transcribus with the goal of making headways into automating the transcription of Ottoman Turkish newspapers that had been published after the mid-19th century. And our choice of applying HTR specifically to Ottoman Turkish print media is an intentional one, and our purpose is to create a workable access point to Ottoman Turkish historical materials that are already digitized. And so far, we work with the automated transcription of 2 newspaper series from the Hakkı Tarık Us online collection, which holds the Ottoman Turkish periodicals that had been published after 1840s. And the long-term goal of our research is to generate general HTR models for text creation from this particular collection that will facilitate its use in computational research. I am going to argue that the text recognition and automated transcription of Ottoman Turkish presents a unique case in the greater universe of Arabic OCR. And let me briefly explain why. Ottoman Turkish was the Arabic script language of administration and high culture in the Ottoman Empire between the 14th and early 20th centuries. But with the demise of the Ottoman state and the creation of Turkish Republic in the wake of World War I, Ottoman Turkish was actually outlawed for public use. And it was replaced by a Turkified version of the language, which is written in Latin script. So thanks to this language reform and alphabet change in 1928, when we are talking about opening Ottoman Turkish text to digital tools, that entails training HTR models to generate transcriptions in the left to right Latin writing system of contemporary Turkish readers, and not, as some may expect, in right to left Arabic script. And this, as I'm sure all of you can imagine, complicates the process significantly, because not only does it necessitate a workaround to address the issue of the passage between writing systems and the change in the text directionality, but it also involves all the challenges of romanizing Arabic script and establishing a transcription scheme that takes into account the lack of one-to-one correspondence between Ottoman and modern Turkish alphabets. So far in our experiments with Transcribus, however, we found that their HTR tool is indeed capable of producing satisfactory results for our rather complicated demands and material. However, before going into the details of that, I would like to say a few words about why I became interested in using this particular tool and method for my material in the first place. My initial interest towards using text recognition for Ottoman Turkish grew out of my own experience of doing research in the Ottoman archives in the late 2000s, which at the time was accessible only traditional analog methods. This is not how the archive looked like when I was doing research there. I am not quite that old, but I think these photos explain perfectly well why the Ottoman archive still lags behind many other early modern imperial archives in terms of accessibility, because it was only in 1985 that the Turkish government decided that they put enough distance between the secular nation state and its Islamic imperial predecessor that they agreed to let a handful of archivists to start working on salvaging the archive, which until that point had basically been left to rot in an old building in Istanbul. So when I arrived there in the later part of 2000s, large parts of the archive were still to be catalogued. And only a few of the most commonly used collections had indices and metadata uploaded to a handful of desktops in the main research room of the archive building. And not a single folio of the documents had yet been digitized. As you might imagine, this was not exactly the most time-efficient way of conducting research in such a rich archive. And the print archive was in no better condition either. The Hakkı Tarık Us collection that I briefly mentioned had not been digitized at all. And one had to actually go through the newspapers page by page by page to discover if there was anything of interest for one's research agenda. And to add to these challenges, of course, let us keep in mind that the Ottoman archive is in a language whose script has been long abandoned in Turkey and for which no digital tools, not even keyword search option are available. Fortunately, there have been some limited but promising improvements in the accessibility of the historical Ottoman Turkish historical text since then. For example, several thousands documents in the manuscript archive and all of the periodicals of the HTR collection have been scanned and made available online, thus allowing researchers to access them at a distance. However, these digitized historical material are still not full text searchable, which limits their discoverability to metadata. So the archive is in practice still isolated from computer-assisted modes of analysis. For example, this is one of the publications that I accessed through the HTR user interface. These are basically rather low quality images of an Ottoman Turkish newspaper, and they are not computer readable. So due to the sheer volume of the available material and the piecemeal nature of their digitization, distance reading of these sources are still not feasible. So our intervention with HTR for Ottoman Turkish focuses on a rudimentary stage of new text creation. It is ground research that aims to produce some of the first, if not the very first searchable text corpus for Ottoman Turkish. And in HTR, we seem to have found a promising tool to lay ground for such a text creation initiative. Like the current generation of OCR, HTR is a deep learning approach to handwritten and printed text recognition. And it offers a statistical brute force technique that utilizes large data sets for pattern recognition without any explicit reliance on linguistic information. So therefore, in practice, an HTR engine can be taught to recognize any writing style from any language. And among other things, this gives researchers a significant amount of room to experiment. For example, in our case with Ottoman Turkish, it even lets us to train it to transcribe our material into a completely different script. And because the system is flexible and accepts changes in parameters, with a large enough training data, it is also possible to generate general HTR models that will work for corpora produced with different handwriting styles or with different typefaces. In my personal experience, a major advantage of using HTR for Ottoman Turkish is its high accuracy rate at recognizing cursive and connected writing styles. Unlike most OCR-based systems, with the exception of Kraken, for example, HTR works at line level rather than at character level, and it recognizes characters in the context of words and lines rather than as individual units. And so this renders it really an excellent tool for handwritten texts, as well as for languages that are printed in analysis step is integrated into the workflow, whereas in HTR, can you hear me? I think there was a, okay. The segmentation step is it's a separate step in HTR workflow. Transcribus does have an advanced segmentation tool built into the user interface, and it performs the layout analysis automatically. In my experience so far, the CT Lab function available in the Transcribus platform, in my opinion, is that it allows repurposing of HTR models, and the ground truth that we use to generate those HTR models to retrain the neural network for recognizing different corpora, as well as for community sharing of those models. So that really helps to save a lot of time for people who are just starting to work with the HTR engine and who are just starting to create their own training data. In the remaining few minutes of my time, I would like to briefly describe how we resolved the issue of the opposing directionalities of the Arabic script Ottoman Turkish material and their Latin script transcriptions in modern Turkey. Let me be clear, Transcribus does support right-to-left languages, so it can easily be utilized for Arabic or for Hebrew. However, it does not allow connecting right-to-left images to left-to-right transcription text, which is exactly what we need to make it work for Ottoman Turkish. So to work around this problem, we devised a hack, if you will, and we reversed the direction of our transcription text in modern Turkish from left to right to left to make sure that it matches the direction of the original text in Ottoman Turkish in Arabic script. To this end, we wrote a short script in Python and we ran it for the plain text files in which we saved our transcriptions. We then uploaded these reverse transcription texts to the platform and we used these texts as our ground truth for HTR training. And this is how the reversed version of the modern Turkish transcription appears in the interface. This is modern Turkish flipped from left to right to right to left. While I cannot say that I am 100% comfortable with this intermediary step, I should say that when we give the algorithm what it needs to optimize its performance, in this case, reversing our transcriptions, it works very well. And so far, after some experimentation with our transcription scheme, we managed to generate an HTR model with a character error rate of around 5% for the particular newspaper series that we are working with. And we are very encouraged by this result. And as I have already mentioned, we are currently working on creating general HTR models for subdomains of the HTU collection. And finally, and briefly, I would like to point out another important practical reason that makes it convenient to you to work with Transcribus for Ottoman Turkish. Unlike Kraken, for example, Transcribus is not a command line software and it has an easy to navigate user interface. It's not necessarily the most intuitive application, but it's straightforward enough. And for those of us who are not necessarily computer savvy, as the overwhelming majority of the Ottomans tend to be, this is really a major incentive to choose Transcribus over a command line application or software. And so for our work with Ottoman Turkish periodicals, David and I believe that text recognition with Transcribus does indeed have great promise, and it will allow us to achieve our goal of enabling keyword searching and hopefully even more complex forms of modeling and analysis of Ottoman Turkish textual content. And we believe that this undertaking could only reach its full potential by the participation of the larger community of Ottomanists. So therefore, I'm really grateful to this platform for giving me the opportunity to talk about this research today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Supan. I love that last slide. That was wonderful with the reverse text. Fantastic. So I will just briefly give some thoughts on what you all have said and use that, I'll inform it with my own experience with some similar projects, but on a much smaller scale. Because at UT Austin, and by we, I mean I, because I'm a one-woman shop at UT Austin. I have been trying to, as pretty much all of your projects are attempting to do, take already available digitized materials and make them more accessible for researchers, right? That's the goal. So we've already done the work of digitizing something. We've hopefully done it well, because as especially Akram showed us, it's a garbage in, garbage out with the images, right? We really need to do some processing on those in order for any of this to be effective. And so ours is much smaller scale, but I've been working with Arabic periodicals, and I've got one in Ottoman and French as well. It was a bilingual periodical. And we've used DocWorks. I don't know if that's familiar to any of our presenters, but it does similar things to what you've seen with how Novoveris presents itself and how Transcribus, how the platform looks, what the user interface looks like. And so most of the work, honestly, is in the zoning, trying to tell the software what is text, what isn't text, and then what kind of text it is and how it should be treated. And we've got some very artistic text in some of these periodicals, some beautiful headings and artist signatures in those as well. And within DocWorks, we've been applying Tesseract, and it's been okay, but we've also had issues, as Peter mentioned, with numerals being a particularly sticky point for recognition. And we've been trying to focus on software that's more open or available, freely available, things that we don't have to pay or pay as much for. And so this all leads into some of the ideas that came to my mind while you all were presenting, talking about your approaches to segmentation for non-book materials. So that could be a wide range of things. I'd love to hear more about your experiences specifically with that aspect of this work, and what seems to have been successful. We've heard some really great things about Google Vision from Akram, but it sounds like there's some goals there to move to an in-house program that will work better or would be more comfortable as part of that project. I'd also like to hear your thoughts on the experience of working with software that you've had to acquire, you've had to pay for, versus software that's been freely available, and how the communities of use around those software has affected your ability to troubleshoot issues that you've been having. Are the communities responsive? Are the developers responsive? I can say from my experience with DocWorks, we've actually been in touch with the developers in Germany and sent them lots of feedback on the accuracy of using Tesseract in DocWorks. And we've been able to make some changes with them to that particular platform to make it a little bit easier, because there's also the problem of directionality with navigation within that interface. But and then also thinking about my question about reinventing the wheel. So what did you find when you first went out to start thinking about these projects? What did you have to create from scratch? What do you wish others could have if they're going to be embarking on a brand new project? What are your recommendations for the field across the board for how to do that? Should there be some kind of organizing body or resource page or something along those lines that everyone can benefit from, that we can constantly update and help guide each other through? What would that even look like? And then last question that I had for now is, how did you manage your collaborations? Where did your funding come from, if you're comfortable talking about that? How did you get the people power necessary to do these projects? Because these are all very intensive projects. And if you were just doing it yourself as a 1 or 2 person shop, how did you work that into all of your other responsibilities and work? And so I'll open it up to the panelists first to start responding to some of that. And then we'll open up to Q&A. If you have a question, please type in the chat, raise your hand if you want to ask it out loud. That's in the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And yeah, with that, I will turn everything back over to the panelists to respond.
Shall I go first? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So excellent questions, and I think it'll probably take us about 2 days to get through them. But that shows the depth of your thinking about this, Dale, and I really appreciate that you're bringing them up, regardless of whether we answer them in full or not at all. For us, we in essence did everything from scratch except for Google Vision. And we made that decision because obviously, as Peter was alluding to, things that are commercial tend to be expensive, and you know, it's very difficult sometimes to work with commercial entities because they have a black box more often than not that they give to you and they say work with it. And we wanted to tailor make a lot of these things. So for example, the system that we developed, we wanted it to be automated. We did not want somebody to sit there and look at zoning. Hence why we ultimately went with Google Vision at this point. I'll come back to that. So basically we can process 1,000 pages every hour in terms of the whole thing. From the point, you know, basically all we do is we give a student, and we wanted to make it very simple. So a student sits at a workstation, they take a folder with all the images that we have, and they could be any kind of, they could be TIFF, PNG, JPEG, PDF. We always transform them to JPEGs. But they take the folder and they literally move it and put it into another folder. That's called input. And then they go away. And basically an hour later, we have 1,000 more pages that have been uploaded into our AWS database. That's basically what we wanted. We wanted to workflow like that because we've had other experiences with other projects in which, you know, like digitizing microfilm, which was a nightmare to talk to the people, developers. The cost for us was far a fraction because we're at a university. So, I mean, to be very honest, we can hire fantastic graduate students in computer science, in statistics, in mathematics, for literally a fraction of the cost. You know, we'd have to pay, I mean, we asked for quotes and everything. And so that's why, you know, I mean, the collaboration becomes absolutely central to this process. Now, Google Vision charges after a while. They give you 5,000 free pages, and then for every page, they charge you a certain amount of money, and you can negotiate with them, you know, but that's why we want to develop our own segmentation, because we don't want to be giving Google any more money than they already have. So for us, I think that's really, you know, again, we set out very clearly to collaborate, and we're fortunate to be in a university environment, which is a highly technical university. And that's really what facilitated for us at this point. I know I'm not answering a whole lot of other questions, but I want
No, that's great. That's great.
It's a fun opportunity. So
Yeah. And sort of a follow-up to that, and this is also for Peter and Suphan, when you're working with collaborators, then it sounds like, Akram, you don't need them to know any Arabic or Arabic script languages.
No, I mean, honestly, again, like I said in my comment, these neural network open source software, they could care less what you're looking for. They don't, to them, it's just you're training them. And so all the computer science people, and we've had about 6 over 3 years that we worked on this project, none of them have anything to do with Arabic. But they have had some experience with OCR and HTR. So I'm glad Suphan brought that up, because the first person that came into this was a person working on a project to recognize doctor's script. And heck, if you can recognize doctor's script, I think you can recognize pretty much anything at that point. So he was a young man. I mean, the guy was like 21 and a genius. I mean, he just sort of started playing around. And again, we wanted to create a system that is very easy for our undergraduate student workers who work on the archive to do. We didn't want anything highly technical in this regard. Although I have to say, thank you, Suphan, for bringing to my attention the transcribus, because I think we'll start playing around with that as well. Because our next project is we have a lot of documents. We have over 500,000 handwritten documents that would definitely OCR will not work on. And so this HTR thing is just genius. So thank you so much. And we'll start playing around with that. And I'll shut up now.
Thank you. Peter?
If I may say something about the kind of in retrospect at Columbia, we would really think twice about this. You know, now that it's almost 2 years now that we acquired this, it's really in terms of computer science and the development and open source software, this is really a big change. The reason we purchased this was that at the time, the head of Digital Humanities Center, he was facing students and faculty who were asking him constantly, you know, we will need this for the software. So essentially, we wanted something better than the software we already had. And then he spearheaded the purchase. As I said, it was not easy, but we eventually bought it. He has since retired. Then, of course, there were the growing pains of the whole installation and reorganization and retirement of Bob, the fellow who headed the center. The question is, you know, we probably would be looking seriously at the open source software. Columbia has strong computer science department. We have a large international body of students who would be able to assist us. But at the time, it was just the immediate need to address that thing. And, you know, it really didn't happen the way we envisioned it at the start. But perhaps this is the way to look into the software that was mentioned today, and having engagement on campus with computer science department and larger group beyond the digital humanities at the library, and you know, outright purchase of something that may or may not address the need.
Thank you. Sukan, would you like to comment as well?
Sure. I would like to say a few words about segmentation. Again, as I said, there is already a tool integrated into the user interface, which seems to be working pretty well for me, even though I work with newspapers that tend to have complex layouts. I find the tool not 100% accurate, but, you know, good enough. And another thing that I really find very useful in terms of layout analysis and figuring out and maintaining that structural information about the page is that Transcribus recently implemented a new tool called P2Pala, which helps you train the neural network to recognize not only the handwriting style, but also the structure of the page. So for people like myself who are working with newspapers or other types of publications, it allows us to train it to recognize the structure of the pages, and then we can extract that information from the interface, which is very helpful because I want to maintain that information about the layout of the newspapers. I don't want to just produce a dump of text, right? So in that sense, I find Transcribus very practical. In terms of not inventing the wheel and finding support, Transcribus does have a very robust and lively user community, which is mainly organized in Facebook, and that community I find very generous, and they help me save an enormous amount of time. And the developers themselves are also, they are encouraging to create the community. They organize a yearly user conference event, and they're also very responsive to the feedback from the community. They will help you figure out things. They will tweak the algorithm. So that is, for me so far, has been the main thing that prevented me trying to reinvent everything from zero by myself, from scratch. The user community is really a great support network. In terms of the cost of using the platform, Transcribus has been free so far, but they are about to implement a payment scheme very soon, I think in a week or so, because they were initially a EU-funded project and their fund ran out, and they are now a cooperative structure. These might actually potentially exclude researchers and archives that don't have the resources to buy in. So it might turn out that only open models will be a more sustainable way of, continuing to work with large-scale HTR projects. That remains to be seen. But so far, it has been a free platform.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So for right now, we'll take a couple audience questions, and then we're going to have Matthew Thomas Miller's update, and then we'll return to discussion and questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and unmute, unless I need to invite you to unmute, or type it in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands. I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. So it might be best then for us to move on to Matt's update, and then we can return to wider discussion.
Evan had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Dale.
You were physically raising your hand. I apologize.
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry, Dale. I couldn't get to the raise hand button fast enough. I just wanted to ask Subhan if you found the images provided by the archive as is to be of sufficient quality, or if you actually needed to perform any image processing to enhance them before running them through your HTR engine.
Okay. Okay. I tried both. I mean, as I said, the HD collection has already digitized everything they have, but they are not necessarily of very high quality. So I experimented with both the image as it is, from exactly as it was, uploaded from their platform, but also doing some pre-processing to trying to clean the noise in the images. And I think it does not make a big difference for the HTR engine. So obviously the main problem, if the image is not very clean, the main problem appears to be in the segmentation stage. It will think, some of the blurry lines, it might recognize as words. So you might need to go back and clean the layout analysis a little bit, but otherwise in terms of text recognition, I didn't notice a significant difference. So I decided to just use the images as they are, rather than doing any pre-processing.
Thank you very much, Subhan. Okay, Dale, am I tagging in, so to speak?
Yes, I'm passing on the baton to you.
Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce Matthew Thomas Miller, who has just shared a couple of very important links in the chat. So Matt, if I may, is Assistant Professor for Persian Literature and Digital Humanities at Roshan Institute for Persian Studies in University of Maryland, and also Associate Director of the Roshan Institute of Persian and Digital Humanities. And we have invited him here to join us as, in his role as Principal Investigator on the Open Islamic Text Initiative Arabic Script OCR Catalyst project, an incredibly important project which tries to mediate some of the issues that have already come up in the comments from our presenters in terms of making more accessible the technology of OCR for researchers, archivists, other collection workers. So Matt, I should leave it there and hand over to you, and we very much look forward to your report on progress with this project. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you. Okay, I am unmuted. Always make sure of that first. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just very grateful to be here and actually learn about all these other really interesting projects. I'm a bit ashamed that I didn't know actually more about all of them coming into this. So I hope some of the things I'm going to say aren't retracing too much of the stuff that's already been said. And I think a lot of what I will say actually will re-emphasize some of the points that some of the other presenters have already made. So I'm going to try to move through things pretty quickly so we have as much time for questions and discussions as possible. But I thought it might be useful, since I know everybody in here has a different level of engagement and knowledge about these things, maybe start back a few years and then work up to what we're working on now and what we're heading towards in the coming years as well. So again, this kind of reemphasize something that I think has already been said here enough. There are many different solutions out there for Arabic script OCR. There's several commercial solutions. There's several open source solutions that have widely different levels of accuracy. And I think the other really important thing is that their levels of accuracy also very much depend on how much technical assistance you have in using them. So a lot of these things, using them just quote unquote out of the box, you will not get very good results on much of anything. If you have, for example, as Akram was mentioning, a computer science student working with you who can fiddle around and retrain models and make adjustments in the workflow, as it sounds like they've done brilliantly, you can get significantly better results with several of these different solutions that are out there. There is the split between commercial solutions and the open access solutions, and some hybrid workflows that can be developed out of both. And again, it sounds like several people here have kind of fooled around with different configurations, and we did that as well in our early tests. The first results that we got was something we worked on in 2016, and it was published, and the link is given in the chat. We basically found that, much to our surprise, this was a collaboration with Benjamin Kissling, who's the creator of Kraken. It was kind of a funny origin story, in that we were kind of all sitting around at a DH conference in Leipzig that Gregory Crane convened there at his DH center, and Sarah Bowen-Savant and Maxime Romanov and I were sitting at dinner with Ben, who at that time was just a graduate student, and we were, doing the perpetual lament of how bad OCR is in Arabic for Arabic script languages, and Ben's just like, this shouldn't be a problem. I think I can fix this. And we were all like, okay, sure, yeah, right. That would be fantastic, but we didn't hold our breath. And he actually emailed us about a month later and was like, I think I've worked up something that I've made some fixes to this OCR engine that I've been working on, and I think it should solve the problems. And we were just like, all right, we'll give it a try. But we did, and actually what emerged out of that kind of initial just small pilot study of what he did with Kraken was eventually published in that link that you can see over there at Humanities Commons. And what we found was that if we trained typeface specific models, so models that were trained and built upon gold standard training data from a particular book, we could get regularly over 97% accuracy with the OCR, and at times even above 99%. Those models, those typeface specific models, now did not always generalize well across other books, other typefaces. And so one of the things that we started moving on at that point, and what came to fruition in this second study that we did, that a lot of the results are available in this other link here that we did in collaboration with JSTOR as part of an NEH grant that they had to do a feasibility study at looking at including Arabic academic journals in the JSTOR database. They basically collaborated with us on doing another round of tests on the El Abhath journal, and which I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with. And so what they did is they actually not just funded us to do this, but then they actually also funded several private contractors to do tests as well with several different commercial solutions. And they determined that the best commercial solution was Abby Fine Reader, and so they kind of, in a kind of a funny academic or intellectual competition, made us face off against each other. And luckily, yeah, that's exactly, Robin. Yeah, thank you. The MEL project. They ended up finding out this was done. We submitted our results and they submitted theirs, and we did approximately about 10 percentage points better on average on character accuracy rates, basically. And so this research, we then kind of, some of it appears in the appendix of that report that's linked, and it's actually going to be published in the next few months in Digital Studies. If anybody's interested in that article, I can send you kind of a pre-publication copy. So, you know, just get in touch. These were kind of the two main studies that we did before this large project that we're working on now, which is funded by the Mellon Foundation. The Mellon Foundation very generously gave us a $800,000 grant, and University of Maryland, to their credit, kicked in another couple $100,000 to make this project really get off the ground. And it's called the Open Islamicate Text Initiative Arabic Script OCR Catalyst Project. I always have to practice that title before I say it because it's quite a mouthful, but its acronym is the Open ITI AOCP project, which is how I'll refer to it. So basically, there's a few things that we're doing in this project, and it was supposed to start last July. We really didn't actually get moving until about 7 months later because we had trouble hiring a postdoc, a computer science postdoc, because unlike the humanities, there's quite a bit of competition for computer science PhDs. And so we actually got a couple of them taken away from us before they were able to start with nice high paying jobs in Silicon Valley. So in any case, so we're a little bit behind, but this 2-year project, which will probably be concluding sometime at the end of 2021 or early 2022, is really focused on doing 3 things. The general goal of it is to create what we call a digital text, a user-friendly digital text production pipeline. And I'll say in a minute a little bit what that means, why I'm not just saying an OCR solution. But let me just give you a few key points from the kind of project plan itself, and then I'll talk on a little bit more at the end about why I'm insisting on this term digital text production pipeline. Okay, so the first main component, and this is kind of the most deeply humanities component of the project, is actually doing a history of Persian Arabic printing. So one of the things that we became very aware of from the beginning was that OCR accuracy rates vary tremendously by the typeface, and there's particular issues in Arabic and Persian printing that need to be addressed by targeted training data production. So we need to understand what typefaces exist within the Arabic and Persian print history, and then we need to then selectively generate training data based on the prevalence of these typefaces and the layouts. And this is one thing we're discovering as we're doing this, the highly specific layouts sometimes that are related to some of these early typefaces. So the goal is here, we're going to be producing about 30,000 new lines of gold standard training data that'll be focused on the most important typefaces for Persian Arabic print history. Now, the goal of this is that if we have the most important typeface is well represented in the training data database, we should be able to construct a generalized model. So a model that is not typeface specific, but actually incorporates the different features of all the different typefaces into one, that is able to achieve high levels of accuracy on all of them. So basically anything that you would throw at it would hopefully achieve relatively good accuracy rates. Now, of course, as with everything, this is a bit more complicated than it sounds. And some of these things we knew about, some of these things we're discovering as we're doing more work on this, but there's specific layout issues that come into play with certain early typefaces. There's issues with segmentation that are a problem, and so we're working on all of these collectively, and it's an evolving project. So that is kind of the first part of it, is really generating a selective body of training data. The second part is integrating several different new types of new advances from natural language processing and computer vision into the OCR pipeline itself. So when we started collaborating with David Smith at Northeastern, who's a well-known computer scientist who works at the kind of intersection of digital humanities and hardcore computer science, one of the things that he made very clear to us was that there's a lot that's been done in the last 5 to 10 years in computer science, in NLP and computer vision, that really has not entered the OCR world at all, and it would be particularly useful for Arabic script OCR application. And so we're working on, and I can come back to these terms if people have questions. I won't go into elaborate detail about each of them, but working on distant or semi-supervised creation of training data, which would dramatically reduce the amount of need for kind of human labor doing this, basically what is an incredibly boring task. I've done about 10,000 lines of it, and believe me, it's not what you want to be spending your time doing. Working on layout analysis, using some particular insights from computer vision to improve layout analysis, automating model retraining so that we don't have to have computer scientists training our models all the time. That's a huge bottleneck in terms of the workflow. Generating unsupervised confidence measures so that if you OCR a document, the computer can give you a sense of approximately how accurate the text should be. So you don't have to kind of go through this laborious task of checking a ton of pages to figure out, well, did this document that was just produced, is it 99% accurate or is it 80% accurate or something like that? And again, I can come back to all these things. Automated model selection. So, when we were working with 7 or 8 typefaces in the first study, or in the case of the JSTOR study, 2 typefaces approximately, although that's a little complicated in that particular case. But, it's easy to train typeface specific models and then apply them and choose them based on kind of visually looking at which model, the script in which model looks similar to the one that you're trying to OCR. But when you start getting into dozens of different typefaces and small differences in typeface transformation and development, the human ability to actually differentiate these things quickly goes down. And so what we want to be able to do is actually have this computationally determined which model or what generalized model configuration would work the best for this particular document. Okay, and then the last thing is multi-language models. I heard this, well, somebody mentioned this already. This was a huge thing that came up in the JSTOR study. A lot of the places where we did the worst were on pages, and this is a huge issue in El Abha, multi-language pages where you have English or French mixed in with Arabic. It was totally throwing off the OCR engine. So we're trying to integrate all these things into an OCR pipeline that is then part of a digital text production pipeline. And our big push in this is that we want to make sure that what we're producing is user-friendly and that it serves multiple workflows, multiple use cases. So we want, for example, this digital text production pipeline to be user-friendly enough that scholars and students who are not at all digitally inclined can upload text, get their text OCR'd, and get them exported in a number of standard compliant formats, and make use of them however they want. That could be anything from just simple searching to librarians trying to produce archival format text in TEI XML, for example. Or for example, those of us who are doing computational textual analysis, we may want to work in a markdown format like the OpenITI Markdown that Maxime has developed and they're using quite extensively in the Kitab project headed up by Sarah over at Aga Khan University. So we want this to be an end-to-end, I hesitate to say end-to-end solution, but we want it to be a full digital text production pipeline so that we don't actually need to have computer scientists or highly technologically inclined digital humanists intervening at all these different steps to get the OCR done, to get the text then into a different format from Alto or some other XML format that the OCR produces, HOCRs, into then formats and scholars can use, because all these are bottlenecks that make it harder and create barriers of entry for people who actually want to use these texts. So that is a really fast overview. How am I doing on time? I really apologize. I forgot to set my phone timer when I started.
Just fine, Matt. Just fine.
Doing fine. Okay. All right. So I just should have a few more minutes here, and then I'll be quiet. So this project at the end of it is going to produce this digital text production pipeline. We originally were collaborating with the Sharia Source project at Harvard Law School and working on a technology called Corpus Builder for this. We've actually, as a result of the workshop that was mentioned earlier, we actually decided to switch gears and partner with another group called the eScriptorum project, which is where Benjamin Kissling is currently based. And Daniel Stokel Ben Ezra is heading that up. They are primarily working on manuscripts, but they actually produced something that's very similar to Corpus Builder, but we actually came to believe that the way that they had done it was actually superior to the way we did it. So we actually have switched over now to collaborating with them on actually further developing out eScriptorum's capabilities. But this will really be at the kind of the root of this digital text production pipeline. From there, text can be either exported into several different text formats for use. They will also be exported into OpenITI's repository on GitHub, which at some point in the not hopefully too distant future will be coupled with a e-reader that Sarah's team is working on that will allow a much more user-friendly and clean ergonomic reading experience for those who just want to read the text and search the text, but not necessarily do anything computational with them, or in the sense of computational analysis. So that is basically where we're at. I just want to say a couple of words about where we're going, and what I think, in my humble opinion, what I think is really important, which I think everybody's emphasized so far. The next kind of thing that we're working on, and we've already started doing experiments on this, is actually working on HTR for Arabic script languages. And so we're very interested intellectually in moving towards OCR for manuscripts, or what is kind of officially goes by the term HTR, handwritten text recognition. We have a couple of grant proposals that are already in on this, and we hope to get funding for, and we'll see how that goes. But we've had the really important thing. One of the important things that we've developed in the Melon, or we're working on in the Melon, is using automatic text alignment in order to generate training data. And this is actually, we think, far more important for HTR than it is OCR. So what I mean by this is we have all these digital texts that exist of Arabic and Persian documents, much more of Arabic than Persian, actually. And we have, you know, in many cases, several different print editions, and certainly way more editions of manuscripts of these works. And I'm using this term editions lightly, but what we can do using PASM, which is a text alignment software developed by David Smith, is we can actually, and we've done experiments with this with several different manuscripts, is that we can take the digital text that we know matches, at least substantially, not fully, because obviously there's a lot of text variations. In print editions, there's footnotes and other things that don't match, but we know that this digital text that we have substantially matches a good portion of what's in the print edition or in the manuscript edition. And the PASM algorithm is actually able to do a dirty, what they call dirty OCR run, and which may, in some cases, in the case of manuscripts, only get 30 to 35% accuracy, if that. But in doing that, it's able to actually match over 50% of the lines. And in matching them, we are then able to generate training data in this distantly supervised or semi-supervised manner that will allow us to then achieve much higher HTR rates, accuracy rates on these texts than we would otherwise. The other option to this, of course, is manually generating training data for these manuscripts. And several projects have done that. And we're able to get, you know, good accuracy rates, but the process is so laborious that it's really hard to see how this is something that can be done at scale, because you need paleographic training, you need expert knowledge of how to even transcribe a lot of these documents. It's not something that you can just throw out there for anybody to do. And so this kind of expert training data production model is really tough to see how it expands and reaches a point where we're actually able to OCR, HTR large amounts of the Arabic and Persian and Urdu and all these other Islamic languages, their manuscript traditions. So we're trying to utilize that text alignment technique to do distant or semi-supervised training data production for manuscripts as a way of really jump-starting HTR. And we're secondly collaborating with another computer scientist named Taylor Bird Kirkpatrick at UCSD, who has developed what has gone by a few names, lacunae reconstruction or in-painting, to do another type of distantly supervised or semi-supervised training data production for manuscripts. And this works by basically, it actually draws on work that's been done in the field of image reconstruction. So you feed it all these manuscript image pages or print pages, it doesn't really matter. It learns the patterns within all these print pages, and then it actually uses that knowledge that it's learned to then try to reconstruct the patterns on unseen pages. And so this would be another method of doing distantly supervised or unsupervised training data production, which, if successful, and this is still a research question, I don't want to make it sound like this is, you know, something that we know 100% is going to work. If successful, could dramatically jumpstart and improve the HTR accuracy over a much larger number of documents. Okay, do I have a minute? I'm not sure where I'm at.
Perhaps one more minute, Matt.
Okay, I'll just say a couple things really quickly. I'll do it in 30 seconds, I apologize. The biggest things that we've learned along the way are collaboration is absolutely essential. And so I really hope that out of this, we actually can connect with more people and hopefully do even more collaborative work. I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that collaboration is also work too, and actually keeping up collaborative networks takes a lot of time and energy and labor ultimately. And that's something that I think it's important to think about in our grant proposals, how to do that. And then lastly, I want to kind of end with a plea for the use of open source solutions, because ultimately the problem with relying on commercial solutions, the problem with relying on organizations that have closed elements of their systems is that we can't redevelop them in new ways. And we can't always make use of them then in the future. And if we really want to create a sustainable digital infrastructure, we really need to be putting our efforts into open source development, even though at times it's more difficult. There's no doubt about that. Okay, thank you. I apologize for going over.
That's fine. Thank you so much, Matt. In the interest of time, I would like to open the floor now for any questions or comments. Yes, Adi, please unmute yourself. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you first for all the speakers. I have a question for Matt. I obviously, as you know, I really like the idea of trying to automate the creation of ground truth, because that's quite a resource-heavy task, which I'm sure a lot of us have been, having to deal with, and the way, the processes that you're suggesting are just going to really scale up the creation of ground truth and improve models. I was wondering whether you tried to play around a little bit with the transcriber's text-to-image functionality, which does something similar to the PASM algorithm that David Smith has developed, so aligning, already existing, editions with transcription. Have you tried to test that?
So yeah, we did. We took a look at it when we were kind of first working on this, and our sense was that the process of doing it was I mean, obviously it helped in the sense that it sped up the process to some degree, but that it wouldn't speed up the process enough to allow us to do this at scale. So when we're saying at scale, we're thinking above kind of like the individual scholar doing this, and we're thinking of library applications of this, where you want, and when I say library applications, I'm kind of using it in the sense that David Smith uses it. I'm not saying necessarily just literally libraries or digital libraries, but in the sense of actually taking enormous quantities of text and working on them, which is obviously a use case that libraries have as well. But being able to do it at that scale is really what we're aiming for, because we think that the scale of the number of manuscripts that we have is so large that doing it within Transcribus' system while speeding up a little bit is still pretty laborious, and does not, it gets us like a half a step, but I don't think it gets us to where we really ideally want to be. And we can be, I think, if the initial tests that we have done are an indication, I think we actually can go 10 steps further ahead.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Adi, did you have a follow-up or?
No, but I think Yasmin wants to ask that.
Okay. Yasmin, are you there?
Yes, yeah, thank
Please
you.
go right ahead. Yeah, lovely to see you.
For this great talk. It was very interesting. I fully agree with you with collaboration and open source being key. I was wondering, how do you get your source texts? I mean, how much, well, I've got two questions. How much do you depend on IIIF images and sourcing basically through the manifest? And, how do you get your corpus together? Is it specific to your institution, or how open is it for collaboration?
And just a clarification question. When you say our text, are you referring to the manuscripts or the digital text, or the scans of print works?
Yeah, mainly to the manuscripts. For IIIF, because I think, I imagine for printed texts or digitized versions of them, you have various formats?
So for the manuscripts, right now, what we've done for the kind of early experiments and the proposals that we've submitted, we basically relied on open manuscript repositories like Walters, British Libraries, Library of Congress, basically stuff that we were able to get offline. At this point, the projects that we're working on are more, pilot projects in the sense that they're proof of concept projects, and so we don't at this point need access to mass numbers of manuscripts yet. But actually, the proposal that we're working on now, the project that we're working on now with Taylor Burt Kirkpatrick, would benefit from actually having more, because this idea of lacunae reconstruction or in painting benefits significantly from the more manuscripts that are made available for training. So this is something actually that we need to consider relatively soon, but as of right now, it's just been accessing the wonderful open repositories that have been put up by several institutions.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So Jake Benson, is that a hand? Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, Jake, have you put up your hand? I'm sorry, I must not be seeing everyone's hands. Go right ahead, Jake.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to summarize a bit for myself everything that's been presented today. And where I'm a little bit fuzzy is I think we were talking about successes, but I would like to qualify some of these areas where we're seeing success. And because in my own experience, just fiddling around uploading documents on Google Docs and things like that, I'm noticing areas of where there's need for improvement. And mainly in terms of printed texts, that very recently printed materials are much better. They have a much higher level of recognition than, say, early 20th century materials that are printed using monotype or linotype, these kinds of processes. And of course, the print quality varies. The first impression might be bleeding. The second one is crisp. The third one is faded. So of course that involves more image prep. Then you also have issues with what I would describe as more problems with medial homoglyphs than initials and finials. Computers readily recognize the initials and the finials, but the medials are still a huge trouble. That it's just not distinguishing the dots. And with languages that are so based on the dot recognition, it's thrown off constantly. So I'm seeing that as being a major factor still. The numbers, I'm really surprised by this, is the fact that we're having such trouble with numbers. I mean, you'd think digitization means like numericizing something, but yet it's like this is a perennial thing where it's reading numbers as words. I don't know, this seems to me a big stumbling block. And then of course, most of these texts are in Naskh Thuluth, very standard text, but the moment you get another script, for example, Peter showed the Nastaliq heading, which Bename Khuda, and it read it as something completely else. I'm sure Subhan has examples of Rika, Ottoman Rika, that are not necessarily very legible. So I just see that in some ways when we talk about success, can we somehow qualify what are the areas that are working, and then where are the areas that maybe we need more improvement? And that's not even touching the issue of, Matt, your work with the manuscripts. I mean, that's just really difficult. I mean, hand to hand, and much less issues like variations in the texts that you encounter, things like that. I mean, we're running into so many issues there. But I didn't know about Transcribus. I thank Subhan and the others for explaining this. I just downloaded it. I'll try working with it, but so far my use of Google Docs, trying to upload PDFs to Google Docs and run anything through it has been really hit or miss. I had an exchange with Matt earlier this summer about one that was in 2 columns, and it just wants to read it as a single column. There's no way of designating the columns, although that's why I appreciate Subhan showing the being able to demarcate areas of the page. But this is, I don't know, if any of you presenters have anything to say in response to that, I'd love to hear more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Yes, I know my own experience with, speaking of a black box, even though Google did open source Tesseract, what they're currently using now is still rather a black box. But the functionality for their engine, which is associated with Drive, of course, it is possible to capture images. So that you basically segment for yourself, but it's, as Matt has mentioned a couple of times, incredibly difficult to scale. And I've seen highly variable results according to essentially the typeface. I did have success recently with a document from the 1930s that did transition from a single column to a 2-column layout and back. Was actually pretty decent on the results, but then of course there's quite a bit to clean up afterward, which is another issue. We have a question in the chat from Samar. Samar has mentioned OCRing English manuscripts.
I mean, there's been a lot more work done on any European language than on any non-European languages, basically.
Absolutely, Latin scripts. I
mean, my understanding, I believe that the most recent data it puts the accuracy rates for a lot of these in like the mid to upper 80s at the best. For some hands, I mean, this is all it's all very specific because it depends a lot on so many factors when you get to manuscripts. But the postdoc on our project, Alejandro Toselli, actually was part of the OCRD team in Europe that did kind of a baseline study of this, and I think that's about where they came up to in terms of accuracy results. Just one other, Jake, just to respond to one thing you said, and this is generally true of Google, one of the reasons Google does well on more recent documents is because almost all of their training data that they use to train their engine is synthetic training data, which means they basically took a lot of digital fonts and generated massive amounts of training data synthetically by taking the fonts and telling the engine, the neural network, to train on the digitally produced data. So this is a way to produce a ton of training data very quickly, but then it also only works well, and it does work pretty well on modern digital fonts, basically. So that's we're focusing primarily on much earlier works for which you need, human produced or at least distantly supervised produced training data for Arabic and Persian typefaces.
Thank you. So Adi mentions in the chat that there's some really good generalized English manuscript models, presumably on Transcribus. Thank you for that, Adi. I know that she's actually provided a PDF there pointing to the models, publicly available models. All right, I noticed the time. Do we have any final questions or comments before we conclude our roundtable event this morning, evening, afternoon, night?
Looks like Robin has a question.
So I'm just going to chime in really fast about the Emil project at Yale, which nobody ever seems to remember. It was launched in 2006 and resulted in 250,000 pages of Arabic OCR, which are still searchable and findable, and which did come up briefly that one of the 20 journals that was digitized has been given to JSTOR al-Abhath in order for them to do the work that they're doing that's described in the white paper. But I also have a little bit of a caveat, and I'm going to
Robin, you're muted.
Oh, for Pete's sake, have I been muted the whole time?
Just for the last 7 seconds or so.
Oh, gosh.
It's okay.
God, it's crazy. I got to get used to this. Okay. Anyway, I've put links to the various bits and pieces of Emil that are still findable. And I was starting to make a point about sustainability of these kinds of projects. Emil started in 2006, and it was when I arrived at Yale in 2012. It was still existing, but the server kept going down. And so that required a lot of human intervention to bring it back up again. And then the entire collection was migrated to a new place for our digital collections, which is the last of the 3 links that I've put in the chat just now. But the difficulty was that when it was first migrated from its old server to the new place, it lost its functionality for about a year. And it took a while to restore the functionality. Now, I just tried it while we were all talking, and it looks like it's working again. But, you know, I just sort of always wonder about the long-term survivability of these kinds of projects as technology changes and as servers decay and staff goes away and equipment is decommissioned. And software licenses are not updated. So that's just sort of my little caveat. The Emil project was pioneering and apparently very successful, and nobody remembers it today. Oh, and also please register for the MELA conference. There's more coming. Don't forget.
Thank you, Robin. All right, so if any final thoughts, questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, nor am I seeing hands raised. Okay, with that, I would very sincerely like to thank all of our presenters and roundtable panelists, and Matt for the tremendous report, and thank you so much, Dale, for serving as discussant. This has been a wonderful opportunity to discuss and exchange, and thank you all for your participation. So we hopefully will be able to make the recording available soon, and we will be in touch when that happens. So lovely to see all of you, and take good care.
Thank you.